on this one, let's see if we can find out what happened. We have a negative 4, and then inside the parentheses 6 plus a negative 4. You have to square all that, and then minus y, which is 6. So it should be inside the parentheses you have a 2. And when you square that, you end up with a 4. So negative 4 times 4 is negative 16, minus 6 is negative 22. Try this one. X times y is going to be negative 1 times negative 2. Plus x, that's a negative 1 multiplied by the quantity squared of negative 2 minus a negative 1. So this part gives me a positive 2, and negative 2 minus a negative 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is positive 1, so I end up with 2 plus a negative 1, which is 1. Pick a number from 1 to 5. Winning number is 4. If you showed all the work on your problems and made an effort on them, then you can bring them up and I'll give you 50 points. If you still need to finish something, then late work goes in the crate back there in third period. 8 people here, and we have 7 with homework, so 7 out of 8 is 88%. Okay, I'll show you the answers for these, and then when we're done with the answers, we can go over whatever you want. I know these were probably rough, but I like to stretch you out a little bit and see what you can do on your own, and then we'll go back through and fix some stuff if we have to. But you're not going to get left behind. Alright, number 1 is 5 plus or minus I square root of 47 over 6. 2 is negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 43 over 3. And we're going to talk a little bit later on about this, about having a negative sign in this spot, and how it's possible to not even mess with this and still come up with the same answer in some cases. Number 2, oh gosh, I can't even talk. I'm trying to spit it out. Here it goes. Your negative 3a squared. It's on the left-hand side of these equal signs, so leave it there. Are there any other a squared terms in the whole problem? Where? That's not an a squared. That's just an a. So we'll have minus 3a squared that just stays by itself on the left. Now move to your a terms. Do we have any a terms only? A to the first power is in there. Where's it at? Yeah, it's there on the right side. So I've got to move it over to this side, and when I do, it changes from positive to negative. The 14, do I have to change across the equal sign with the 14? No, it stays on the left. You just put it in order. Squared, first power, constant. And there's your quadratic equation in a normal form. So from there, you do the discriminant, negative b squared minus 4 times a times c, and that's 4 plus 168, which is 172. That means it's going to be real. Alright, and then you finish it out from there with your quadratic formula. You know that you already have this part finished. Negative b, so a negative, negative 2. At the bottom you'll have 2 times a negative 3. Just simplify it all out. Break up the 172 as a 4 and 43. So you can find the square root of this to get a 2. Divide everything by 2. Or actually a negative 2, because you have a negative sign on the bottom. Should get negative 1 plus or minus the negative square root of 43. Let's say, just for the sake of example, that you have finished your quadratic formula down to the point where you have a negative 10 plus or minus 6 over a negative 2. Now you're never going to leave it like this, but what do we do when we end up with a negative on the bottom? Yeah, you could multiply the top and the bottom by a negative 1 and get rid of it. But before we do anything like that, why don't we just solve this out or evaluate it and see what we do get just the way it is. Negative 10 plus 6 over negative 2 and negative 10 minus 6 over negative 2. What do I get for the first answer? Negative 10 plus 6, what is it? He says negative 2. Negative 10 plus 6 is a negative 4, and I divide by negative 2 and get what? Positive 2. Yeah, positive 2. And on the second one, negative 10 minus 6 is a negative 16. Divide by negative 2 to get a positive 8. So that's what happens when you just leave it alone. Now let's simplify it. Let's divide all this by a negative 2. If I divide negative 2 by negative 2, what's left? 1. Do we have to write it? No. If I divide this by negative 2, what do I get? 5 is right. And if I divide this by negative 2, what do I get? Negative 3. Okay. So let's do this twice now. Let's do this one twice and see what we get. And I'll keep that in black there. So 5 plus a negative 3 and 5 minus a negative 3. What do I get for the first one? 2. And what do I get for the second one? 8. 5 minus a negative 3 is 8. So you see how it doesn't change the value of the answer when you're dividing by the negative? All right. Let's say I ignore this. Let's say you end up with an answer like this. 5 plus or minus a negative 3. And remember I told you on those other answers that we would look at this part right here. Having a negative number on that second one after the plus or minus sign, let's see what happens if we ignore that sign altogether. Let's say we went through our problem and we divided by negative 2. And we completely ignored the sign for this second part up there. And I'm talking about this. We paid no attention to this sign, paid no attention to this. What if I rewrite this, ignoring that sign, and just make it 5 plus or minus 3? What happens when I do 5 plus 3? What happens when I do 5 minus 3? Those the same answers I had before? Yes. So, it's a matter of choice. If you're in college and a professor says you're not going to have anything over there other than a positive number, then you don't put anything over there but positive. But here in Algebra 2, you're first learning this. If you happen to put a negative number there, I'm not going to mark you off half, and take points away from you. But I just want you to know that it's not going to change. Since this is plus or minus, it's not going to change the outcome of what you have there in that situation. All right, number 3 is 3 plus or minus negative I square root of 31 over 10. 4 is 3 over 4. On number 4, the general purpose here is to get all of this into the quadratic equation form, where you have an x squared, and then an x term, and then a constant, and all of it equal to 0. So here's your equal sign. Equal sign is here, and I'm going to put a red circle around it. What you want is to identify what's already over here that's a square term. If you have a square term here on the left, then just leave it there. Do you have any other x squares in the entire problem? Where? Yeah, over here. And if I move this over beside the 10x squared, am I going to have to cross this equal sign? Yes. And when I do, what happens to that operation? Yeah, it becomes plus. So you'll notice here is where I have done that. So we already have this on the left, and we've moved this over. So there are no more x squares in the entire thing. So now we move on to the x terms. We have a minus 11x. It's on the left. Are there any other x terms in the entire problem? Just an x to the first power? Yeah, 13. 13x. Will I have to cross the equal sign? And what will it become? Yeah, negative. So there's a minus 13x. So we've taken care of that. This stays on the left and that moves over. Now what's the last thing we have to put down? What have we not used yet? We haven't used the 9. So there it is. And you just put the 9 down. So notice that everything is now on the left-hand side. And it's equal to 0. So 10x squared and 6x squared, you have to combine those. They're like terms, so it's 16x squared. 10 plus 6. And then negative 11x minus 13x is negative 24x. And of course the 9 can't simplify with anything, it's just by itself. All of that equal to 0. Does that make sense so far how we've set up the problem? Okay, from there then you're just back to normal. If you want to find the discriminant, it's b squared minus 4 times a times c. So that's 576 minus 576, which turns out to be 0. And if it's 0, then it's real. Anything that's 0 or higher for your discriminant, you get a real answer. So this one ends up ending fairly quick. You have negative 24 plus or minus the square root of 0, which is just 0. And when you simplify this stuff, you have 24 on the top, 32 on the bottom, and it's just one answer, 3 over 4. 5 is negative 2 plus or minus I square root of 6 over 2. 6 is negative 3 plus or minus the negative 3 square root of 7 over 8. 7 is 1 plus or minus I square root of 3 over 2. 8 is negative 4 plus or minus 3I over 5. 9 is 2 plus or minus the square root of 10. And 10 is negative 5 plus or minus negative I square root of 55 over 4. Today's objective. Complex number system, we're still in there, but now we're solving quadratic equations with real coefficients that have complex solutions. Here's an example. Okay, it's not in the regular form. Can somebody tell me the first thing I have to do in this problem to get it in the regular form? We want to move everything to the left side. Okay, so what term do we start with first? X squared, right. So we have negative 2x squared. Are there any other x squares in the problem? What do we move to next? X. So I have a 3x here plus 3x. Are there any other x terms? 4x. Do I have to cross the equal sign? What does it become? Negative, yes. No more x terms in there. What's the only thing left? We have the minus 5 here. Does it have to cross the equal sign? What does it become? Positive 5. All right. Now, what do I have to do next to keep simplifying? Yeah, combine like terms. We have a 3x minus a 4x. What is 3x minus 4x? Not 1. Negative. 3 minus 4 would be a negative 1, so we have a negative x. And there's nothing for that 5 to simplify with. So once you get it in that form, you can go through and do it just like a regular quadratic equation. Your discriminant, what is the b value? B value is not 1. It's not negative x. It's negative 1, right. So negative 1 squared minus 4 times a. What's a? Negative 2. And what's c? 5. All right, so let's square the negative 1 and get 1. You have minus a negative in here, so that means it's a double negative. It becomes plus. 4 and 2 is 8 times 5, 40. Discriminant is 41. Is it going to be a real or a complex answer? It's a real answer, yes. All right, so on the next page we can finish it out. We're going to need to know what the b was. That's a negative 1. And what the a was. That's a negative 2. And our discriminant is 41. Alright, so here on the next page, the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And our b was negative 1, so it's a negative 1. We already know all of this. We did it and came up with 41. And on the bottom, 2 times a was negative 2. So simplify to get a 1 plus or minus the square root of 41 over a negative 4. What can I do to simplify now? What's wrong with this answer? Yeah, there's a negative 4 at the bottom. What can I do to get rid of that negative sign? Yeah, you can multiply the top and the bottom by negative 1. So if I multiply the top by negative 1 and the bottom by negative 1, it doesn't change the value, but it does make it neater. So I have a negative 1 plus or minus a negative square root of 41 over a positive 4. Now from what we went through on that one screen, what can I do to even further simplify this? There's one little item in there that I could take out. Remember we went through it and I showed you the 3 possibilities that you could work something out and you had the same answer all the way through. Take out what? Which negative? Yeah, the 1 in front of the square root. You could do that and have negative 1 plus or minus square root of 41 over 4. And have the same outcome as if that sign wasn't in there. Since this is plus and minus, it's simply having a negative sign there on that term only reverses the order in which you find the answers. Remember when we went through it the first 2 ways on that one time, I think it wasn't it 2 and then 8, and then 2 and then 8, then when we reversed it, it came up 8 and 2. But it's still the same answers. You already have an x squared on the left. We'll leave it there, and there are no other x squares. You have a 4x on the left. You have a negative 2x on the right, which must cross the equal sign and become plus 2x. We have a minus 6 on the left. It stays there, but the minus 1 goes over to the left and becomes plus 1. When you simplify this, you should have x squared plus 6x minus 5 equals 0. Did anybody have x squared plus 6x minus 5 equals 0? Yes, yes, yes. All right, so that means you're still on the right track. Does anybody not understand how we came up with x squared plus 6x minus 5 equals 0? 6x came from 4x plus 2x. We simplified those to get 6x. Okay. Well, the discriminant is going to be 6 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, and c is a negative 5. So 36 plus, because you have a double negative, 36 plus 20 is 56. It's going to be real. Storms, did you discover something?
Yeah, I subtracted.
Uh-oh. So you came up with a 16?
Yeah.
Which would have gave you a perfect square, and you ended up with a 4 on the right side in your formula. All right. Well, let's see. The 56 is going to be the discriminant, and when we go to the formula, we're going to need an a equals 1 and a b equals 6. So we'll do that on the next page. All right, in the quadratic formula, remember it's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And the b in this case is 6, so we have a negative 6 plus or minus. The discriminant was 56, so we don't have to work that out again. And a is going to be 1. So when you simplify, you come up with just a 2 on the bottom. 56, the highest perfect square that can come out of 56 is what? 29? Or 49. Will 49 divide evenly into 56? Remember, it's a matter of division and not subtraction. So we have our perfect squares of 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, and 64. To check this, you cut 56 in half. Half of 56 is 28. And 28 falls between 25 and 36. That means none of these down here are even possible. So 25 doesn't go into 56, neither does 16 or 9, so 4 will go into it. When you break it up, it is the square root of 4 times the square root of what? 4 times what is 56? 14, yes. So then we simplify the square root of 4, and we're going to have negative 6 plus or minus 2 square root of 14 over 2. How can I simplify this? I have this, this, and this. What number goes into all three of these? 2, yes. So if I divide that by 2, I get a negative 3. Divide this by 2, I get a 1. And divide this by 2, I get a 1. So what you're left with is negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 14 over nothing. It's just 1, so you don't write it. So there's your final answer. Answer on the bonus should be 2.